Masquera say More Zimbabwe, welcome to our channel Zoom Confessions and Deep Secrets. Kana kariki kutanga kukuya paneno channel, please don't forget to subscribe. Kana uchungwa gara wa subscriber, don't forget to comment and share this video. Nas More Zimbabwe takigira inhe ya buditswa. Na Mauta Mzembe, the former foreign affairs minister, ababuda bachitaura pa msoro pe the 2017 coup pamwichete the way forward babuda bachitaura Zakare about the dialogue yavaida kuita between Kasukuwere na vanonso Chamisa chinzi. He tried kubatanidza Kasukuwere na Chamisa, but it was a tedious task in Zimbabwe, and they have never been involved in such a tedious task in Zimbabwe. And there's no kubudirira and fungano wazhinji vakabuda vachiri in order to bring down the current ZANU-PF leadership iripo, as there is need for a coalition between opposition parties. Then and the people should set aside their differences, then join forces to fight ZANU-PF. So in an audio ya buditswa na Mauta Mzembe during a Twitter space ya host one crisis in Zimbabwe, babuda vachitaura ivo vachiti he tried the dialogue but azinobudirira. Sikada kuwesta nguwa yenyu toti mungondo zvataona wa Mzembe muhamadza zvamuri kufunga pamusoro penyaya iyi mu comment section.
Asked by Boss Salani as to whether we are able, post this current regime, to work with opposition. I think the question I would pose back to her is that if we are unable to work together in our circumstances now, how are we able to work together post this current scenario? I think we should aim to work together now to cure the problem. And let me hasten to say that I was involved towards 2023 in brokering a solution towards convergence between Nelson and Serbia. And I've never been involved in such a tedious task of trying to reconcile entitlement. So we must approach convergence without bringing the baggage of entitlement to the table, even now as we try and cure this problem. We must approach this problem, this challenge, with a unit of purpose to deal with the elephant in the room. And we can only do that without carrying the baggage of entitlement to the negotiation table. So yes, it is possible to work together in the before scenario and in the after scenario, provided we treat each other with mutual respect, without entitlement, we'll fix this problem. The second question that I had is, how do we fix this issue? And when I was making my submission, I think I was cut short on that subject matter. And I was just about to say that we need to identify those in our midst, it could be regionally or internationally, who can convene Zimbabweans. You can see that here we are convened, but it's a one-sided convention of people of like minds. So the other party, who is supposed to be another interlocutor of this discussion, is not in the room. So we need to identify those people with a natural and historical clout to convince Zimbabweans to put us inside one room so that we can throw things at each other back and forth, like what happened during Lancaster. The United Kingdom was able to convene unlike opposites into one room. People were coming from the bush, coming from inside Rhodesia, under one roof to talk. And the marching orders were, you come out of this room when you have an agreement. So who is going to convene these opposites going forward so that we are able to talk? The churches in Zimbabwe have tried that and they have failed. The chiefs have tried this and they have failed. Religious leaders have tried this and they have failed. And I want to submit here that in my assessment as a diplomat, and I've worked in diplomacy for the last 15 years up to 2017, and up to now I'm still seized in that space. I make the assumption that the only entity that can convene us in our diversity today under one roof is probably the British themselves. And why do I say that? Because they were party to the problem in November 2017. You mentioned, many of you mentioned here, that this coup was described as a military assisted transition, but you didn't tell us who qualified it as such. It came from an international narrative that basically said it was a military assisted transition. Why? Because of expediency, the expediency of wanting to see Mugabe's back without thinking of an alternative, rushed everybody, including us inside the country and those outside the country, to sanitize a situation that was largely unconstitutional and unlawful. The same people have the clout even to this day to convene all of you on their grounds in Harare. I've seen Nelson rushing to the British ambassador's residence, Christopher Mtsangwa rushing there, Lillian, all these figures in Harare rushing to celebrate the king's birthday. And I suddenly reflected that these people still have that clout to convene Zimbabweans, perhaps under another Lancaster House 2.0 structure. And I submit that it is only probably the crown itself. That's why Emerson rushed to go and congratulate King Charles, arguably his only visit to the United Kingdom, because he respects the British as much as all of us here in this room. We have some kind of subservience to the British. So let them convene us under an arrangement where we are able to talk without going into the substance matter, just facilitating and convention, and make us talk. They may not necessarily do it in another Lancaster House. It could be done in Rwanda at Kigali International Conference Center, but under the auspices of the Crown. Why the Crown? Because even to this very day, we are crying. This current government is crying to be part of the Crown through the Commonwealth. Why? Because we have some kind of atavistic connection with the British. So I submit that going forward, we must try and find a solution inside that realm of a respected convener, a respected facilitator who can bring all of us under one roof. And possibly that entity may be the British Crown itself. And they don't go into the substance of what we are talking, they just facilitate that we are brought under one roof. And there are various options and imperatives that can persuade the current government to be in that meeting. They want to join and rejoin the Commonwealth, but we are not leveraging that as the Crown to say, okay, you want to rejoin the Commonwealth, but what about the human rights agenda? What about freedom of... Yes. Are you... can I proceed? Hello?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, so I'm just throwing a possible facilitator, convener amongst you to try and reflect on whether this is practical or not. But I know that it is practical because they've done it before and they continue to do it. To the two questions, and also listened to the very invaluable contribution that has been made by one speaker after the other. I think the fundamental question arising out of November 2017 is that all the three pillars of the state, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, were collapsed into one. So we have a dysfunctional state. When these three pillars operate as one, you actually cease to have checks and balances, you cease to have accountability, and power is concentrated in one person, and it is from that one person where we all draw our livelihoods and our source of living, and it is essentially a characterization of what is happening today. So there was a major infraction in November 2017. I don't need to describe it. You know it, you have lived it in the last 7 years. The big question going forward is, how do we cure this iniquity? How do you cure a coup? History tells us that unless some sensibilities prevail amongst the citizens of a country to cure a coup can only be cured by another coup, failure of which you actually descend into anarchy, you descend into serious insecurities around those who committed that infraction. They will forever be looking behind their back, imagining that the next coup is coming. And what I see on YouTube, on social media, is a sponsorship of that narrative where the nation is forever in anticipation of another coup in order to cure the iniquity of November 2017. But let me suggest something that I think will probably be workable going forward into the future. We have a history of conflicts as a country, leading into 1979, when our first conflict was cured through a national dialogue process convened by the British, and we dubbed it the Lancaster House Conference. And it gave us at birth and grandfathered our first constitution in 1979/1980 and gave birth to Zimbabwe. Our second infraction was around the Gukurahundi crisis, which culminated again in terms of resolution in another national dialogue process that was called the unity talks between ZAPU and ZANU, resulting in a merger of ZANU and ZAPU. And it gave us a respite from that conflict. Going forward into year 2000, again, after another major infraction with the alleged sponsorship of a new opposition in our midst, presumably by Westminster, and it resulted in another national dialogue process that resulted in the aborted 2000 national constitutional process. Fast forward to 2008, another major infraction, which again was cured through a national dialogue process called the Global Political Agreement, resulting in a government of national unity and subsequently in an adoption of a new constitution in 2013. Fast forward to 2017, arguably the biggest infraction in our midst since our birth as a nation, which was the November 2017 coup. No national dialogue process has cured this major infraction. In fact, there was an attempt to sanitize the coup through some high court verdicts. It didn't work. There was an attempt to cure this coup through two successive elections, 2018 and 2023, which only resulted in further infractions, disputes, and illegitimacy. And here we are today. We are still reviewing November 2017 because there's never been any prescriptive solution to November 2017, and it can only come from a national dialogue process. The question is, who convinces Zimbabweans? Because we are seemingly unable to be convinced.